Imagine this: icy winds cutting across a dark Norwegian fjord. The silence of a peaceful nation suddenly shattered as German destroyers slice through the black waters like steel predators. On the other side of Europe, British intelligence scrambles to interpret frantic signals, unaware that within hours the fate of Scandinavia, and perhaps the North Atlantic, will take a dramatic turn. Under the surface of routine winter calm, an operation that will stun the world is already in motion, and the people living along those quiet shores have no idea that their homeland is about to become the center of a strategic showdown that will alter the course of the war. This is the moment a hidden invasion begins to breathe. Hello, welcome back to the channel. Today we step into the chilling, high-stakes story of Operation Weserübung, the German invasion of Norway, a campaign born out of desperation, strategy, and the ruthless logic of global war. As we journey through this episode, we'll explore the fears driving both the Allies and the Axis, the secret planning inside Hitler's war rooms, and the unfolding tension that would soon explode along the fjords, mountains, cities, and icy seas of Northern Europe. What you're about to hear is not just a timeline. It is the human, political, and military drama behind one of World War II's most surprising invasions. At the dawn of 1940, Europe was in a strange, uneasy pause. World War II had begun, but the Western Front was eerily quiet. Newspapers would later call it the Phoney War, a period where both sides stared at each other across fortifications but made no decisive move. Yet beneath the surface, anxiety ran high. Germany depended heavily on Swedish iron ore to fuel its factories, and during the winter months, that ore could only be shipped safely through the Norwegian port of Narvik. The route was Norway's lifeline, Sweden's economic artery, and Germany's industrial oxygen. Disrupt that supply, and the German war machine would suffocate. This fact did not go unnoticed by Britain and France. Inside Berlin, Hitler obsessed over the same problem. He feared that the Allies, especially the British Royal Navy, might seize Norwegian ports, block the iron trade, and open a new front along Germany's vulnerable northern flank. The British had already begun laying mines in Norwegian waters, and secretly debated supporting Finland during its conflict with the Soviet Union through bases in northern Norway. If British forces entered Scandinavia first, Hitler believed Germany would face a stranglehold. To him, losing Norway was not merely a setback. It was a threat to survival. This fear ignited the idea of Operation Weserübung. On paper, it would be a lightning-fast strike: seize Denmark as a stepping stone, then take 6 major Norwegian cities almost simultaneously: Oslo, Bergen, Trondheim Kristiansand, and Narvik. Germany would use warships, aircraft, paratroopers, and soldiers disguised as friendly forces to overwhelm Norwegian defenses before they understood what was happening. It was audacious, risky, and unprecedented. But in Hitler's view, it was necessary. Norway, for its part, believed neutrality would protect it. Its military was small, underfunded, and far from ready for a modern war. Government officials hoped diplomacy could shield the nation, even as warning signs multiplied. Newspapers reported unusual German naval movements in the Baltic. British destroyers were spotted near the Norwegian coast. Rumors spread that both sides were preparing plans involving Norway, but political leaders clung to hope that neither power would dare violate a neutral Nordic state. The people of Norway went about their daily routines, fishing, farming, shipping, confident that this distant war might pass them by. But hundreds of kilometers south, German soldiers were already boarding ships. Under strict secrecy, troop transports and warships gathered at German ports. Officers briefed their men only moments before departure. Across the fleet, engines roared awake as destroyers, cruisers, and even the infamous heavy cruiser Blücher prepared to set course for the Norwegian coast. The sailors knew the risks. The British Royal Navy dominated the North Sea. A single encounter could doom the entire mission. But discipline and surprise were the operation's shield. While Germany mobilized, the Allies debated how bold they should be. Churchill, then First Lord of the Admiralty, was convinced controlling Norway could deal a devastating blow to Germany. He pushed for mining operations and even considered landing troops to secure Norwegian ports. But political hesitation, legal concerns, and the fear of a diplomatic backlash slowed the British response. Every delay, every meeting, every cautious step gave Germany more time to prepare its strike. In the final days before the invasion, Norwegian officials received multiple warnings. From diplomats, from intelligence agents, even from Germany's own behavior. Yet each warning collided with disbelief. Norway had no desire to provoke either side. It refused British requests to establish bases and rejected German assurances that no invasion would occur. This fragile balancing act could not last. Then came the night of April 8, 1940. British forces launched Operation Weserübung, mining Norwegian waters to block German ore shipments. It was a bold move, but it lacked follow-through. British troops waited offshore, uncertain whether they should proceed inland. Meanwhile, German ships were already racing north, hiding in fog banks and darkness. One German officer later described the moment like this: "He felt as though destiny itself was pushing us forward." In Oslofjord, coastal defenders noticed unusual silhouettes approaching. In Narvik, fishermen observed strange warships entering the harbor. In Bergen and Trondheim, Norwegian officers fielded confusing reports of unidentified vessels moving at high speed. Some suspected British ships. Others thought they were routine merchant convoys. Only a few guessed the truth, and by the time confirmation arrived, German troops were moments from landing. Operation Weserübung had begun, not with radio broadcasts or loud proclamations, but with engines humming quietly against cold waves and soldiers preparing to storm cities still lit by street lamps and unaware citizens. The invasion was not just a military assault. It was a race against time, surprise, and uncertainty. Norway stood on the edge of a storm it did not expect, while Germany gambled its future on a mission that could either secure its strategic lifeline or collapse under British naval firepower. And as the world slept, the fate of Norway began to pivot in silence. In the early hours of April 9, 1940, the calm of the Norwegian morning was shattered as the first echoes of war rolled across the fjords. The invasion that German commanders had so carefully planned was now unfolding with breathtaking speed, precision, and chaos. As German warships pushed deeper into Norwegian waters, the defenders, caught between disbelief, confusion, and isolated pockets of determination, scrambled to understand what force was suddenly bearing down on them. For many soldiers standing on the cold ramparts of coastal batteries, the sight of massive steel holes slicing through the mist felt like something out of a nightmare. In Oslofjord, the German flotilla approached under cover of darkness. At its head steamed the heavy cruiser Blücher, carrying hundreds of troops destined to capture the Norwegian capital and the government. If the Germans could seize Oslo before political leaders escaped, the entire resistance effort might collapse within hours. But the fjord was not undefended. At Oscarsborg Fortress, Colonel Birger Eriksson, an aging officer who had never fired a shot in combat, faced a decision that would echo across Norwegian history. He saw the unidentified warships approaching. He received no clear instructions, and he understood that if he hesitated, his country might be lost without a fight. With determination that surprised even his own men, he gave the order. "I am not going to fire a warning shot. Fire." The fortress's ancient cannons, nicknamed Moses and Aaron, roared to life. Shells smashed into the Blücher, tearing open fuel tanks, igniting fires, and sending flaming debris into the cold water. Torpedoes, launched from a hidden underground battery long considered obsolete, struck next. Within hours, the pride of the German invasion force was sinking beneath the ford, taking with it soldiers, supplies, and critical invasion plans. It was a stunning Norwegian victory, and for a moment, it seemed the capital might be saved. But despite the setback, other German ships quickly redirected. Troops landed farther south and pressed toward Oslo by land and air, determined to secure the city. Farther west, the city of Bergen awoke to explosions echoing across the harbor. The German cruiser Kaolin led the assault, pushing past coastal defenses under relentless fire. Norwegian gunners, many of them reservists with little combat experience, fired until their ammunition ran dry. Crowds of civilians watching from windows and doorways saw German troops marching into their streets by mid-morning. The Luftwaffe, flying overhead with a frightening sense of dominance, dropped bombs on defensive positions and demoralized the defenders. By the time German soldiers lowered the Norwegian flag at Bergen's fortress, the city had fallen. In Trondheim, another German task force executed a daring maneuver. Under heavy fog, they sailed directly into the harbor, bypassing defenses that should have offered stiff resistance. The Norwegians, unsure whether the ships were British or German, were slow to react. By the time the truth became undeniable, German soldiers were already marching through the city center, securing vital government buildings and radio stations. One officer later wrote that the invasion felt like a surreal dream, Organized chaos wrapped in cold silence. But in some places, German forces met fierce resistance. In the coastal city of Kristiansand, Norwegian batteries opened fire repeatedly, forcing German ships to retreat several times. Miscommunication and poor visibility further hindered the attackers. Only after the Germans used captured Norwegian signals and flew naval flags to deceive defenders did they finally enter the harbor. Even then, the fighting continued through the morning as confused and isolated Norwegian units attempted to regroup. Far to the north, the icy port of Narvik became one of the most dramatic battlegrounds. German destroyers landed mountain troops who quickly seized control of the town, but they soon found themselves dangerously isolated. British destroyers entered the fjord days later, launching fierce battles that sank German ships and pinned their troops against frozen mountains. The clash for Narvik would become one of the most intense naval confrontations of the early war, drawing in Norwegian, British, French, and Polish forces and turning the remote Arctic landscape into a brutal chessboard of fire and ice. Back in Oslo, news of the German invasion spread rapidly. Telephones rang in government offices. Alarm sirens wailed through the streets. Soldiers scrambled to form defensive lines. Civilians hurried home or sought shelter, still unsure whether the explosions they heard were distant thunder or the start of something unimaginable. As German troops closed in on the capital, the Norwegian government and royal family made a desperate decision. Rather than surrender, they fled inland to continue the fight. King Håkon V, deeply respected by his people, refused to sign the German demands for capitulation. His defiance became a symbol of resistance that would inspire Norwegians throughout the occupation. All across the country, confusion and fragmented communication slowed the Norwegian response. Many units were mobilizing for the first time since World War I, relying on outdated equipment and minimal training. Soldiers reported to barracks only to find weapons locked in storage or ammunition reserves too low to sustain serious combat. Yet despite these obstacles, ordinary citizens joined the effort. Railway workers sabotaged lines. Fishermen ferried troops across fjords. Students carried messages through forests and mountains. Norway was unprepared, but it was not passive. Meanwhile, the British and French scrambled to react. Reports of the invasion flooded London, prompting hurried meetings and frantic discussions. Churchill pushed for immediate action, convinced that a counterattack could drive German forces back into the sea. But the Allied response was slow, disorganized, and plagued by logistical chaos. Troops were dispatched toward Norway, but poor coordination and unclear objectives hindered early operations. At sea, British destroyers struck several German vessels, yet failed to prevent many others from reaching their targets. The Allies were reacting to a plan that Germany had executed with startling speed. German paratroopers, one of the first major airborne operations in history, secured key airfields, including the strategically important Fornebu near Oslo. Once the Luftwaffe controlled the skies, reinforcements began pouring into captured airstrips. This allowed Germany to sustain its momentum despite setbacks elsewhere. The rapid arrival of troops by air shocked the Norwegians, who had never seen such tactics before. Norway was engulfed in fighting from north to south. Towns had fallen, battles raged across roads and harbors, and the map of Scandinavia was transforming before the world's eyes. Germany had gambled everything on surprise and speed, and for the most part, it was working. Yet the resilience of Norwegian forces, combined with the incoming Allied reinforcements, meant that the campaign was far from over. As night fell on April 9th, soldiers on both sides prepared for the brutal days ahead, unaware that the battles to come would be far bloodier, far more chaotic, and far more decisive than anything the first day had revealed. As dawn broke over Norway on April 10th, the true scale of the crisis became impossible to ignore. Smoke drifted over harbors still echoing with the sounds of battle. German aircraft patrolled the skies, their engines humming like a constant reminder that this was no longer a distant European war. This was now a fight for the survival of a proud and peaceful nation. Yet even as German troops began tightening their grip on the southern cities, a powerful belief took hold across the country. Norway would resist for as long as it could, no matter the odds. The Norwegian government, now operating from the interior town of Elverum, was determined not to surrender. The royal family moved deeper into the mountains under armed guard, accompanied by ministers and military officers carrying whatever documents and equipment they could salvage. Every mile they traveled became a race against German patrols and reconnaissance aircraft. The roads were filled with refugees, soldiers on bicycles, and trucks overloaded with supplies. Families watched from farmhouses as military convoys rumbled past, knowing that the war, once a distant headline, had now arrived at their doorsteps. While German forces advanced through the valleys and rail lines, the Allies finally launched counter-operations intended to push the invaders back. British, French, and Polish troops landed along the rugged western coast, particularly in areas like Diendolsens and Namsos. Their mission was to support Norwegian forces, retake the major ports, and cut German supply routes. But from the beginning, their efforts were plagued by harsh weather, poor planning, and relentless German air superiority. The Luftwaffe dominated the Norwegian skies, attacking Allied positions almost at will. Columns of troops marching inland were repeatedly forced to take cover as bombs fell around them, turning snowy mountainsides into chaotic scenes of smoke and debris. Despite these challenges, the Allied landings sparked pockets of hope. In central Norway, Norwegian troops, now reinforced by British soldiers, launched counterattacks aimed at recapturing Trondheim. For a brief moment, it appeared the Allies might score a major victory. They pushed forward through forests and villages, their spirits raised by early successes. But the weather turned against them. Fog and snow grounding Allied aircraft while German planes continued to strike. Supply lines faltered, communication broke down, and each day saw German reinforcements arriving faster than the Allies could advance. Meanwhile, the battle for Narvik erupted into one of the most dramatic confrontations of the campaign. The remote Arctic city became the center of intense fighting as German mountain troops, isolated and desperate, held the surrounding peaks and fjords against constant attacks. British destroyers clashed with German ships in two fierce naval battles that left the fjord littered with wreckage. For the first time in the war, Allied forces began gaining the upper hand. Norwegian soldiers, supported by French Foreign Legionnaires and Polish troops, launched a determined assault through deep snow and freezing winds. They fought their way up mountain slopes, navigating icy cliffs and avalanche-prone terrain, gradually pushing the Germans back toward the Swedish border. The liberation of Narvik on May 28 marked a rare Allied victory in the early months of World War II. But even this triumph was overshadowed by events unfolding far to the south. In early May, Germany launched its massive offensive through France and the Low Countries. The Allies, suddenly facing disaster on a much larger scale, were forced to divert troops from Norway to save what they could in Western Europe. Norwegian forces, already outnumbered and lacking modern weapons, now found themselves fighting without the reinforcements they had been promised. The government realized the truth without the Allies. Further resistance would only lead to catastrophic casualties and the possible destruction of entire towns caught in the crossfire. As German troops pressed deeper into the interior, the Norwegian army's supply situation deteriorated rapidly. Ammunition was scarce, food was rationed, and many soldiers were exhausted from marching through mountains, fighting in harsh weather, and enduring constant air attacks. Yet morale remained surprisingly strong. Soldiers wrote letters home describing their determination to continue the struggle, and civilians brought food and warm clothing to the front lines whenever they could. Norway's fight had become more than a military campaign. It was a symbol of national courage. The turning point came in early June. With the Allies withdrawing under orders, the Norwegian government faced an agonizing decision. Alone, with no realistic hope of outside support, further resistance would lead only to pointless suffering. On June 7th, King Haakon VII and his government boarded the British cruiser HMS Devonshire and sailed into exile. They left Norway not in surrender, but in determination to continue the struggle from abroad. Their departure was quiet, solemn, and filled with emotion. Soldiers saluted from the pier. Families waved small Norwegian flags. Many wept openly as the ship disappeared into the mist. 2 days later, the Norwegian commanders formally capitulated. The fighting ended, but the consequences were only beginning. German occupation took hold across the country, bringing martial law, censorship, and the installation of a collaborationist regime. Yet the spirit of resistance never disappeared. Norwegians formed underground networks, sabotaging rail lines, smuggling intelligence to Britain, and helping Allied airmen escape through dangerous mountain routes. The courage shown during the invasion would continue for 5 long years of occupation, becoming a quiet but powerful defiance that the Germans never fully crushed. Operation Weserübung itself became a pivotal moment in World War II. For Germany, it secured vital iron ore shipments and opened strategic naval and air bases that would influence the Battle of the Atlantic. But it came at tremendous cost. The losses of ships, aircraft, and elite troops weakened German capabilities for future operations. The sinking of the Blücher alone deprived Germany of hundreds of trained soldiers at a crucial moment. Many historians argue that the resources spent on occupying Norway drained Germany in ways that would later prove disastrous during its campaigns against Britain and the Soviet Union. For the Allies, the campaign exposed serious flaws in planning, coordination, and military readiness. The slow response, divided strategies, and failure to secure air superiority showed that the Western powers were not yet prepared for the fast, modern warfare Germany had mastered. Yet Norway also demonstrated moments of Allied strength and bravery, particularly in the naval battles around Narvik, where British forces achieved victories that would shape naval tactics for years to come. For Norway, the invasion became a defining chapter in its national story. Despite being militarily unprepared and strategically vulnerable, the country resisted with remarkable determination. The actions of Colonel Birger Eriksen at Oscarsborg, the stand of Norwegian soldiers in the mountains, and the resilience of civilians under fire formed a legacy of courage that continues to be honored today. Norway's refusal to surrender its freedom, and the king's refusal to comply with German demands, inspired not only Norwegians but millions across occupied Europe. As the campaign closed, Norway stood scarred but unbroken. The invasion had begun in darkness and uncertainty, but the legacy it left behind illuminated the strength of a small nation caught in the storm of world conflict. Operation Weserübung was not simply an invasion. It was a dramatic clash of strategy, courage, and the will of a people who refused to yield quietly to oppression. And though the final outcome placed Norway under occupation, the story of its resistance and resilience became one of the most inspiring chapters of the Second World War.